Hi everybody, this is Matthew's Movie Mentions. We're on week 11, the 18th of March, and I've seen 11 films this week, which might be a new high. I've definitely mixed it up with some new movies, some movies that I think I should have seen at some point, and just random stuff that looked kind of interesting. I felt less burned out watching so many this week compared to how I did last week, so I wonder if this is the way to go, is sort of flip between the different types that might be interesting. So, this week we are discussing Barbarella, Whale Rider, Annihilation, Admission, Unstoppable, Jabberwocky, Brazil, Nocturnal Animals, Transformers The Last Night, Interview with the Vampire, and Guardians. Barbarella, it feels like a film I should have seen, but I'm not sure it's actually a film I should have seen. Because of the content of it, there's an element of feeling a bit creepy, a bit seedy watching something like that. And it was an important release, but before I was born, before I started watching films. It's one that gets referenced a lot, though, so I felt like I should probably see it. I should probably see it at some point. It is possible to watch this and think that it's basically trash. It seeks to titillate, but it does that quite poorly at times. There are some kernels of good ideas in here. With some of the science fiction stuff, some of the plotting is it's fairly interesting. And the way it approaches sex and sexuality, it feels more liberal and open than the majority of other films. So I don't know if I can recommend it, but I definitely got more out of it than I expected to. Whale Rider, for a completely different experience. I remember when Moana came out, there were lots of comparisons with Whale Rider. I can see where that's coming from. It's doing a similar story, and certainly it almost ends up in a very similar place. But the fact it's about Pi fighting for her place in this male-dominated society, it makes it a much stronger film. She wants that place, and she is doing whatever she can to take it and to seize it, and to be worthy of it as well. Not just it's her right. She actually wants to live up to what would the expectations that would be on her had she been a boy. The performances were excellent. There's no one in this film that you can't empathise with and feel for. You understand everyone's place in the story and their background, even if their goals ran counter to Pi, our hero. They're still intriguing characters, and you can still see where they're coming from as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed Whale Rider. Annihilation thoroughly confused me when it came up on Netflix. I'd been looking forward to seeing this at the cinema, but it turns out it's not being distributed internationally by Paramount, or at least outside of US and China. So Netflix are distributing it, and I think it definitely sits on a list of great cerebral science fiction. So alongside films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Inception, Arrival, Interstellar. There's bits of this film that were more sinister and a bit disturbing at times. There's a sequence in the middle that's almost... it actually is frightening. More so than even 2001, which does do sinister incredibly well. But I loved Annihilation. I thought it was excellent. Really, really good story. Great effects. Just terrific. And great film. After Annihilation, I wanted a palate cleanser, so I found Admission, a comedy about, I can't even remember which college it was, but a college's admissions department, and Tina Fey works on that admissions department, and Paul Rudd wants to send a kid to that school and wants to seek out her help. This would have been much better if they'd pitched it as a drama, or tried to make it more of a drama than a comedy. It was almost difficult because they were making the application process the be-all and end-all of this college degree and being successful in the future, as though the studies themselves and the course and the life at the college weren't important at all. It also, in the final act, it takes a turn that I don't think it earned, and I don't think it helped it as a story. And again, had they gone much more in the dramatic... towards the dramatic end of the spectrum, it would have been more successful in doing that twist, but it didn't work as a comedy. Unstoppable was the palate cleanser I wanted. A runaway train on tracks out in, I think this was Virginia. The only people who can stop it are Denzel Washington as the veteran driver and Chris Pine as the rookie conductor, and it's directed by Tony Scott. It was pretty ridiculous in a number of ways that normally I'd scoff at, in this kind of sort of action disaster movie, I'd go, okay, I don't believe it, but fine, I'll watch it as kind of popcorn fodder. Except this was based on a true story, so I don't know, perhaps I need to rethink all my views on films like Top Gun and other disaster movies of this sort. There were some good effects, actually, some good practical effects throughout, some good tense moments. It didn't quite get past the plot holes that stood out about trying to chase down a train. But the characters were actually pretty likeable and made the film quite likeable. Rosario Dawson was the controller, and she was excellent. She was very good, as always. So it was an exciting film. Jabberwocky, there's a podcast called Movie Crush that I really enjoy, and they were doing an episode on Brazil. Netflix didn't have Brazil, but they had this, which is another Terry Gilliam that I hadn't seen, so I thought I would watch Jabberwocky. I wish I hadn't. It wasn't funny, it wasn't very good, it wasn't clever, it wasn't interesting. Moving on. Amazon Prime did have Brazil, so I watched that the next day. I had tried Brazil many years ago, and I just hadn't been able to get into it, so I only watched part of the film. I tried again now, and it's still not good. It's got some interesting visual elements. I know that's one of the things people talk about. There's some really interesting stuff going on, and things being placed in every scene. But I don't think it has a message behind what it's trying to do with the visuals. It's trying to do a metaphor about government bureaucracy, about surveillance in a sort of 1984 kind of world. But I don't think it's actually giving you a message about that. It's just saying, hey, isn't this stupid, the way the government can behave? The film gets bonus points because Jonathan Pryce was good as ever, and Michael Palin played almost a mirror of Jonathan Pryce, the flip side of a coin in some ways, and that was an excellent pairing. That really worked for me. Nocturnal Animals was a recommendation from Laura Stewart Berry on Twitter, Laura_S_Berry. It was a film that she said she couldn't say she enjoyed, but that there was a lot of discussion and thought from having watched this film. I really enjoyed it in exactly the same way. It's really quite stressful to watch, and there is a lot to process having seen it. It's a beautiful film. It's shot in such a visually wonderful style, both the sort of claustrophobia of some of the in-building sequences, but then the wide open spaces when they're driving around West Texas. Someone like Tom Ford, this is exactly the sort of film I would expect to see from someone who is so conscious of aesthetic and visual appearances. Amy Adams and Jake Gyllenhaal do superb work. Their characters are portrayed across two periods, and Jake himself then has to portray another fictional character, not quite in two periods, but at either end of a year almost, which he does in a very unique way. It's worth a watch if you're in the mood for something a bit deeper and a bit more thoughtful. When I turned that off, Transformers The Last Night was on, and there was a scene which featured Hot Rod, which was a Transformer I loved as a boy, and it made me laugh. So I thought, do you know what? I will watch Transformers The Last Night. And I wish I hadn't watched this as well. The series is obsessed with relationships in a way that I don't understand for movies about giant robots. I don't get why we have to have relationships. And the giant robots are very disappointing and poorly constructed. So, yeah. Interview with the Vampire is another film I feel I should have watched at some point. I think I haven't watched it because I love Buffy and particularly Angel so much, and I feel like the Angel historical sequences will end up either feeling less good because of Interview with a Vampire, or the Interview with a Vampire does that better, or that one or the other will have ripped something off. I do have a little bit of that feeling from this, and I'll be interested to find out which came first, the writing of this book or those series and so on. But I was surprised by the story in general. It was more intense than I expected. Some of the stuff it was doing romanticised the vampire life in a way I expected from an Anne Rice story. But at the same time, it gave a counterpoint about how it could be lonely and empty and largely a bit horrid at times. The ending let it down. It felt very much like a 90s ending from a Scream or something along those lines. Like, surprise, something slightly horrific, and then we finish the film. Okay. Yeah, that felt like a product of that 90s thing. Now it would have been a bit more intense, perhaps a bit more thoughtful about what it was doing. And to round us off, I watched Guardians, which I'd been really looking forward to after the trailer last year. It was effectively a Russian version of X-Men or Avengers. It is that, but it's done pretty badly. A lot of the dialogue is either poor exposition or worthy of going in the trailer. It's just so blunt and obvious. Some of the practical stuff wasn't that good. Like, some of the ideas were quite good, but generally it was just not done very well. It was pretty disappointing. And having looked on Wikipedia, because I wanted to see, was this based off anything? Having seen the reactions of critics, particularly in Russia, they slated this, and one of the production companies is suing someone else. And I think the production company is suing what are they doing? The production company's suing the distributors, or the distributors are suing the production company or something, because they've lost so much money on it, and they want to make that money back. So, yeah, very poor, very disappointing. My recommendation this week is easily Annihilation. Terrific. The story and the science fiction elements were really, really well done. The effects were beautiful. The direction was wonderful. Such high quality. The performances were gripping. There was a lot of interesting differences between all the characters brought together and being forced to work together and combine to the unit that we see in Annihilation. So, easily recommendation of the week. Next week, what are we watching? Oh, I get to watch a documentary. We're doing Indie Game the Movie for Pop Culturally Deprived, so I'm going to be watching that and a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, because I know there's a lot of extra content to go with that one. And there's a few films coming out at the cinema at the moment, so I'm hoping to make a trip soon. The Avengers trailer has just dropped, and Odeon are now selling tickets, so I might be planning when I get to go and see that finally. So, I will speak to you all on week 12.